The Long Road by Wolfland. Without warning, Kingdra's glare narrowed, and the air around Agron's pedestal began to swirl with increasing intensity, until a mighty twister had engulfed it completely. Desperate claw marks were left gouged in the pedestal as Agron tried to hang on for dear life, but the twister plucked the heavy Pokemon off the ground as if it weighed no more than a sea dot. Buffeted by the strong winds, Agron grunted in pain as it was lifted high above the surface of the pool. One blue eye cracked open as it struggled to gain its bearings in midair. By the time it had figured out which way was up, the winds died down as the twister subsided. Twisting around to face the direction of its rapid descent, Agron gaped in surprise as the way down was now blocked by Kingdra, riding a rising column of water. "Agron, protect!" Steven shouted a hurried command, but Kingdra was closing too rapidly for his partner to react in time. The dragon's head was lowered as it plowed right into Agron's unprotected midsection. The defenseless Pokemon let out a choked noise before somersaulting backward from the force of the blow. Tumbling out of control, Agron slammed into the pool with a thunderous crash. As Kingdra lowered itself casually back to ground level, Steven didn't have to wait long for the referee to raise her arm. "Agron is unable to battle!" "You did really well," Steven smiled as he brought Agron back to his belt. He knew it was overly optimistic to think Agron might be able to take out all of Juan's Pokemon on his own, but knocking out 2 of 3 was a good start. Unfortunately, the only Pokemon remaining was a surly-looking dragon, one type Steven hadn't planned on facing at a gym that specialized in water types, and it got a stat boost from Baton Pass to boot. Maybe they could buy some time with a countermeasure. "Claydol, let's go!" A loud sputtering noise was heard from the sidelines as Claydol materialized on the battlefield. "What are you doing?" Wallace shouted, his hands flying skyward in disbelief. Steven scowled, and he tried to ignore Wallace's outburst as a bit of guilt crept into his mind. "Sorry, Claydol," he muttered under his breath. But Juan simply quirked his brow with a hearty laugh. "It seems as if my own student has turned against me. Although, I'm inclined to agree with my young pupil. This is your second Pokemon that is weak to my team's strengths. Do you have another trick up your sleeve?" Not willing to entertain the leader with a response, Steven remained impassive as he gave his partner its first command. "Set up a reflect, Claydol!" Kingdra growled as the shimmering barrier rose into place, and Juan regarded his ace while he returned to playing with his mustache. "I see. Well then, Kingdra, let's put a stop to their plans with Twister!" Again, the wind on Steven's side of the arena began to whip up into a frenzy, and he braced himself for the attack. They didn't have much time left. "Claydol, light screen next!" He had to shout over the sound of the growing storm. But the twister was wreaking havoc on Claydol's levitation, and it wobbled about on its axis, sending its eyes rolling this way and that. "You can do it, Claydol! All we need is that light screen!" Stabilizing on its axis, Claydol whined a determined note and raised its arms to summon the psychic barrier. But just as the air began to shimmer, a nasty gust ripped across Claydol's body, and it flinched in pain. "Ice Beam!" A brilliant beam sliced through the middle of the twister, striking Claydol in the midsection. Steven's eyes widened in shock as the wind whipped the ice beam into a maelstrom of frigid air, and Claydol was instantaneously frozen in place. Encased in ice, its levitation faltered, and it tumbled to the ground, eyes closed and unmoving. The referee peered at the downed Pokemon for only a moment before raising her arm. "Claydol is unable to battle!" Unease churned in Steven's guts as he recalled Cladle to its ball. Hoenn had sniffed out their plan only one move in, and Kingdra was so swift with its attacks that the light screen hadn't been set. He knew Cladle was going to be a sacrificial Mareep, but he'd hoped it could have given his third Pokemon a bit more support. "Metang, it's up to you." Steven's starter chattered as it appeared back on the familiar battlefield in a familiar situation. Ace versus Ace again. Its eyes narrowed as it sized up the dragon type wearing an irritable glare. This time, Wallace didn't have a comment, and instead fixed the battlefield with an intense look of his own. Hoenn took notice of the silence and steeled his gaze. "You know as well as I that I won't fall for the same tactics you used against my student." Steven nodded, meeting the leader's stare. Hoenn smiled. "Good. Then let's make this last round one to remember." He swept a hand forward in a grand gesture. "Kingdra, Waterfall!" With a trumpeting call, Kingdra raced forward, leaving a torrent of water in its wake. "Brace yourself!" Steven shouted, and Metang hunkered behind crossed forelegs, eyes wary. In a brilliant splash, Kingdra met Metang's defense in a full-body charge. The two Pokemon stalemated for a moment, before the water began to prickle underneath Kingdra's tail. Suddenly, a column of water shot skyward, lifting both Pokemon high above the arena floor. Metang's form shimmered with Reflect's protective barrier, but Kingdra wasn't deterred. A startled screech issued from Metang as Kingdra jammed its horns underneath its body and flipped the steel type free of the geyser with a toss of its head. Steven's eyes were glued to his partner's falling form, fist tense at his side. "Regroup with Zen Headbutt!" Psychic energy gathered around Metang's form, righting its haphazard fall, and with an echoing cry, it shot towards Kingdra with startling speed. The dragon clearly was not expecting the attack, and it squealed as Metang slammed into its side. Following through with its tackle, Metang dove the two of them back down to pool level. But before it could send Kingdra careening into one of the pedestals, the dragon type fired a point-blank ice beam. The force of the attack pushed Metang back, just enough for Kingdra to slip out of the dive bomb. Chattering, Metang swatted the remains of the ice beam away with an angry claw, before shooting back towards Kingdra, a fist glowing. The bullet punch connected with Kingdra's snout, sending the seahorse Pokemon spinning. But Metang wasn't done. Both claws brought to bear, its eyes glowed blue with psychic energy. And just as the dragon's angry stare found Metang's own, Kingdra found itself engulfed in a psychic attack, and flung backwards past its trainer with such force that Hoenn's coat rippled in the resulting breeze. The gym's back wall exploded in a shower of tile, but Kingdra only slumped for a moment before rising unsteadily and finding its way back to the battlefield. Both Pokemon's stares never wavered, even as they both heaved from the exertion.